$7 billion worth of imports from the European Union as part of their ongoing battle over aircraft subsidies. The U.S. and EU have accused each other of illegally subsidizing their respective main aircraft makers, Boeing and Airbus. It's election day in Israel. The country will soon determine if incumbent Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will secure a fifth term in office. His main opponent is retired military chief Benny Gantz. It's proving to be a very tight race. Netanyahu is trying to capitalize on pro-Israel moves made by his American counterpart, Donald Trump. President Trump has moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And the Trump administration has also gone after Iran, perhaps Israel's chief rival. These moves could bolster support for Netanyahu, who heads into the parliamentary elections dogged by corruption allegations. For more on the Israeli elections, let's hear from Clifford D. He's the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I started our conversation by asking him about Mr. Netanyahu's main challenger.
Well, Benny Gantz is an experienced Israeli military general, a former military chief as well. He is, I would say that he is somebody who is saying, look, it's time for a change in this country, and I can do the job. For a long time, there's been a view, whether people liked Netanyahu or didn't like Netanyahu, that the man is very capable. He knows what he's doing. He is not trigger happy, but he's also not going to sacrifice or risk Israel's security. And so there have been very few challengers that had a real chance. Benny Gantz probably has a better chance, again, because he's a military man, because he's serious. He's probably a little bit to the left of Netanyahu, but I would not call him a leftist by any means. Again, he like Benjamin Netanyahu, sees Iran as an existential threat and one that is that needs to be taken very seriously.
Benjamin Netanyahu, before the election, just recently vowed to annex settlements in the West Bank. What do you think is the political calculus of making this promise?
Well, look, there's no question that in Israeli politics, it's not simply, it's a very complex system. You have to win is not a matter. There are 120 seats in parliament. You have to have more than 60, but no one party will get more than 60. So that means you have to form coalitions. Netanyahu is likely to try to form coalitions with the more right of center parties. If this has a political motivation, it's to say to them, I'm with you. Perhaps Benny Gantz would not be so with you. There are, particularly in the large settlement blocks, the ones that will not be included in a Palestinian state, even if one can be negotiated. And I see no prospect of that anytime soon. In those large settlement blocks, people would say, you know, we'd like to be formally annexed, formally part of Israel. After all, if there is to be a settlement, we will be part of Israel. We're not all going to leave places like Mali Adumim, which is really a suburb of Jerusalem. There can be land swaps. That's been proposed in peace processes of the past, but we're going to stay in it, so why not make us official? There's all kinds of reasons why that would be better. So that's, from a political point of view, that's what he's doing. He's making clear to people who live in these communities that I'm with you, and it will help them surely with the more right of center parties.
President Trump has had a very pro-Israel stance, several moves in Israel's favor. He's also very critical of Iran, much like Israel is. How do you think his relationship with Mr. Netanyahu will help Netanyahu in the polls?
Well, Netanyahu certainly hopes that's the case, and I'm sure there are Israelis who say, look, very important to us that we have a prime minister who gets along well with the administration in Washington, and Prime Minister Netanyahu does. So we'd be silly to change horses in the middle of this stream. Let's see what happens after the next election. Now, will there be a critical number of such people, or will other people say, yeah, but Benny Gantz is a solid guy. If he sits down with Trump, they'll get along. They don't see the world that differently. I can't tell you, and I don't think anybody can tell you, how those numbers cut at the end of the day. And I don't think the polls are likely to be able to predict that accurately.
And the polls had shown that Netanyahu was trailing Gantz leading in. Is that a cause for concern, or are the polls even reliable in Israel?
The polls aren't very reliable, and there are such polls, but again, it's not simply a matter in Israeli politics of who gets the most votes, which party gets the most votes, because neither the Blue and White Party of Benny Gantz nor the Likud Party of Netanyahu is likely to get over 60 votes in the parliament. So then it's a matter of what other parties do well enough and are willing to form a coalition either with Likud or with Blue and White. So it's more complicated than simply looking at the polls, and the polls can be unreliable, as we know, including, for example, 2016 in the United States. The question is not just how people are going to vote, but who's going to come out and vote. A lot of people think, for example, that young people would like a change. Maybe they would. Will they act on that? I can't tell you that, and I don't think anybody can.
Yeah, I think we've all learned to take polls with a grain of salt after the 2016 U.S. election. Clifford May, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, it's important to note that millions of Palestinians can't vote in today's Israeli elections. It's nearly impossible for Palestinians living in the Israeli-occupied West Bank to gain Israeli citizenship. So they can't cast a ballot, even though Israeli settlers can. Same holds true for Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and no one in Gaza can vote today. But Israeli policies directly impact their lives. Israel still determines what and who can be let in and out of that territory. The U.S. is closely following Israel's elections, particularly progressive Americans. They've been increasingly critical of the Middle Eastern country. Newsy's Ben Shemiso explains why.
Young American progressives are increasingly